Alien girl asked the human for one night of safety, but what she returned the next day shook him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The storm came in fast over the frontier outpost, a dry electric wind that scraped dust against the metal siding like a handful of nails. Ethan Ward stood on the narrow maintenance deck, tightening the last bolt on a faulty sensor while the sky flickered with heat lightning. His visor readouts glowed pale blue against the dark, battery at 22%, wind gusts over 60 miles per hour, temperature dropping even though it was still barely past sundown. He muttered under his breath, feeling the outpost shiver beneath his boots. That was when the outer alarm chimed, a sharp, single tone that wasn't supposed to ring at this hour. He froze. Nobody traveled the ridge after dusk. The desert could swallow a grown man in minutes. Ethan climbed down, boots echoing on the graded steps, and crossed the dim corridor toward the airlock. Dust drifted through the beams of the flickering overhead lights. When he pulled up the external camera feed, he felt his breath catch. A figure stood in the storm, cloak whipped around her by the wind. She was small, barely outlined against the swirling dust, her skin catching the harsh light in muted shades of blue and silver. She lifted a hand toward the camera, not quite touching it, just close enough for him to see the tremor in her fingers. The audio crackled, struggled, then carried her voice, soft, strained, almost swallowed by the wind. Just one night, she said. One night of safety. Then I'll be gone. Ethan stared at the screen, jaw clenched. He didn't do surprises. Didn't do strangers. Not anymore. The last time he opened his door to someone unexpected, he lost more than a crew. He lost the part of himself that trusted first and questioned later. But the storm outside deepened, swirling so densely it looked like the night itself was folding in. And the girl, whoever she was, didn't move away from the door. She just stood there, shoulders trembling beneath her torn cloak, as if she'd already used up the last of her strength simply reaching his outpost. His thumb hovered over the comm switch. Old instincts warred with old scars. The wind howled, rattling the frame. Finally, he exhaled. All right, he said quietly. Come inside before the storm takes you. He hit the unlock command. The airlock cycled with a heavy metallic sigh, and warm air rushed outward into the cold. Ethan stepped back as the inner door slid open, and she stumbled inside, leaning on the frame for balance. Up close, he saw her eyes, violet, luminous, scanning the room as if expecting danger in every corner. But it was her voice, barely above a whisper, that made him still. Thank you, she breathed. Then her knees buckled. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor, feeling the faint, rapid pulse beneath her chilled skin. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't the storm alone. And letting her in, he realized, might change far more than his quiet night. Ethan carried her carefully to the small bench near the heater, the warm air humming against the chill that clung to her cloak. She steadied herself with one hand on the metal frame, breathing slowly, her eyes adjusting to the softer light inside the outpost. Dust slid off her boots in thin ribbons, leaving pale trails on the floor. He reached for a thermal blanket, the fabric crackling faintly as he unfolded it and wrapped it around her shoulders. She did not resist, only watched him with a quiet alertness, as if memorizing every movement. You should sit, Ethan said, keeping his voice even. Storm like that can drain a person fast. She nodded and lowered herself carefully, her fingers brushing the edge of the bench as though testing its stability. For a moment, neither spoke. The heater clicked on again, filling the small room with steady warmth. Her skin, faintly blue and silver, caught the low light in soft reflections. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than he expected. I am fine. Just needed shelter. Ethan glanced at the diagnostic panel on the wall, pretending to check system levels. In truth, he needed a moment to think. A stranger showing up at his outpost was unusual. A stranger like her was something else entirely. Storm will pass by morning, he said. Then you can move on. She lowered her gaze, fingers knotting together beneath the blanket. Morning is enough. I will not trouble you longer than that. The way she said it carried a quiet finality, as if she had rehearsed those words many times. Ethan took a slow breath, feeling the familiar tug of caution in his chest. He had let her in because he could not leave someone outside in a storm like that, but now she was here, real and fragile in a way he could not yet name. "What is your name?" he asked. Her eyes lifted to his, clear and bright. "Lyra." She hesitated. "You do not need my full name. One night, that is all." Ethan nodded. He sensed that pressing would shut her down completely, and he did not want that. He crossed the room to a small storage locker, retrieving a sealed bottle of water, placing it within her reach. Lyra studied it, then accepted it with a soft thank you that barely rose above the hum of the heater. Steam drifted from the small kettle in the corner. He realized he had left it running earlier, planning tea after his long shift. Without thinking, he poured a cup and set it on the table beside her. Lyra cupped it in both hands, letting the warmth spread into her palms. Her eyes softened. "Humans heat water for comfort," she murmured, almost to herself. "Yes," Ethan replied. "Cold is a hard thing to face alone." A faint expression flickered across her features, something like understanding mixed with exhaustion. She leaned back slightly, letting the blanket settle around her. Outside, the storm thinned, the wind softening against the walls. Inside, time felt gentler, as if the outpost itself had lowered its voice. Lyra looked toward the door, then back at him. "I will leave quietly at dawn," she said. "You will not remember I was here." Ethan shook his head. "I will remember someone knocked during a storm. That is enough." She held his gaze for a brief moment, and in that silence, he sensed the weight she carried, the kind that did not come from travel or weather. Whatever had driven her into the storm was still with her, settling like a shadow behind her eyes. And Ethan, despite every instinct to stay detached, felt the first quiet shift inside him. The subtle pull that comes when a stranger's presence begins to mean more than it should. The storm settled into a low rumble against the outpost walls, a steady reminder that the world outside still shifted restlessly in the dark. Ethan adjusted a dial on the heater, the soft click echoing in the small room, before turning back toward Lyra. She sat quietly, her posture straighter now, though her hands remained wrapped around the warm cup as if anchoring herself to something solid. The silver-blue shimmer of her skin softened near the glow of the lamp, creating an almost gentle haze around her features. Ethan moved to the console, checking the perimeter sensors out of habit. Everything read normal, just drifting sand and low visibility. Nothing unusual. Yet he could not shake the feeling that the air carried more tension than the storm itself. Lyra watched him work, her eyes following the small motions of his hands. "You check the sensors often," she said softly. Ethan nodded without looking back. "Old habit. Keeps things predictable." She tilted her head, curious. "Predictable feels safe to you." It was not a question, and for a moment he felt exposed, as if she had walked straight into a room he had not intended to unlock. He cleared his throat. "Out here, routine keeps you alive. Storms come without warning. Equipment can fail. A quiet night can turn fast." Lyra considered that, her gaze drifting to the window where dust brushed softly against the glass like distant fingertips. "We do not have storms like this where I am from," she said. "Danger there is quieter. It is the kind that waits until you stop paying attention." Ethan turned to face her fully. Something in the way she said it carried a weight that tugged at him. "Is that why you were out there?" he asked. "Something quiet, that stopped waiting?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she lowered her eyes to the cup, watching the thin trail of steam curl upward. "I was traveling," she said at last. "I needed a place to pause. That is all." Ethan could tell it was not the whole truth, but pushing would drive her further behind that guarded expression. He let the silence settle instead, giving her the space she seemed to cling to. The kettle clicked again, its soft hum filling the quiet. Lyra lifted the cup to her lips, taking a slow sip. "This taste," she murmured, "is strange, but it is warm." Ethan almost smiled. "That is the point." She glanced at him with a hint of something lighter in her eyes. For a moment, the outpost felt less like an isolated shell in the desert and more like a place with room for another heartbeat. "If the storm clears by morning," Ethan said, "I can give you a route toward the valley ridge. It is the safest path." Lyra's fingers paused around the cup. "You would do that for someone you just met?" I let you in, he replied. Helping you get out safely seems like the next step. Her expression softened, but her voice carried a quiet uncertainty. I do not know if the morning will be safe. For me or for you. Ethan studied her, noticing the faint tremble in her exhale. She was afraid of something she would not name. Something that had followed her long before the storm. He stepped closer, not touching her, just enough that the distance between them felt intentional rather than accidental. You are safe here tonight, he said simply. The words hung in the warm air, steady and honest. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the weight of them. When she opened them again, there was a fragile calm behind the violet glow. Thank you, Ethan, she whispered. The storm continued its quiet song outside, but inside the outpost, a different kind of quiet settled, one threaded with trust, and the first faint sense that neither of them would leave this night unchanged. Ethan moved through the small outpost with the kind of practiced quiet that came from years of living alone. He checked the gauges on the water recycler, adjusted the heater one notch higher, and tapped the weather display on the wall. The storm outside had calmed into a soft hiss, drifting sand brushing against the metal panels like a distant whisper. Dawn was still hours away. Behind him, Lyra sat where she had been, the blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Her posture had shifted, less rigid than before, though he could sense she remained alert beneath the calm. When he passed her on his way to the supply shelf, she glanced up. You do not sleep much, she observed. Ethan offered a small shrug. Never been good at it. It was true. Years of late-night repairs and unpredictable weather patterns had trained him to rest lightly. But there was more to it, something he did not say. Silence settled again, warm and steady. He placed a small first-aid kit on the table, opening it with a soft click. Your hands, he said. They are shaking. Might be from the cold. Let me see. Lyra hesitated, then extended her hands toward him. Her skin held a faint glow under the lamp, cool to the touch, but warming slowly as he wrapped a thin thermal band around each wrist. The device emitted a gentle hum as it activated. Lyra watched him with a curious expression. Humans fix things, she said quietly. Machines, wounds, anything broken. Ethan secured the band and sat back. We try. Her gaze lingered on his face as if studying the truth behind the simple words. Where I come from, people are taught not to intervene unless ordered. It is safer that way. Her tone held no bitterness, just the weight of a lived reality. Ethan leaned his elbows on the table. Safer does not always mean better. Lyra looked down at her hands, now wrapped in soft warmth. Maybe, but sometimes safety is the only thing someone has left. Something about the way she said it tightened his chest. He opened his mouth to speak, but the console chimed before he could. A single, sharp tone. Not an alarm, but a system request. Ethan rose quickly and crossed to the panel. The display pulsed with a communication prompt, a routine check-in from the regional monitoring station. They sent these at random, verifying that all outposts operated within normal parameters. He felt Lyra shift behind him, her voice lowering. Will they detect I am here? Not if I handle it, Ethan said. He tapped the screen, keeping his tone calm and neutral as he responded to the automated questions. Status normal. No anomalies. No visitors. His thumb hovered for a moment before sending the final confirmation. When the message transmitted and the console lights dimmed, Lyra released a breath she had been holding. You lied for me, she whispered. Ethan turned toward her. I kept you safe for the night. That was the agreement. She held his gaze. Something unspoken rising in her eyes. Gratitude, but also confusion, as if she did not understand why someone would choose to protect a stranger without demand or reward. You did not have to do that, she said. Most would not. Ethan returned to the table, settling into the seat across from her. Most are not out here, he replied. And you asked for one night. I said yes. Lyra's expression softened in the warm light. The blanket around her shoulders slipped slightly, revealing the faint shimmer of her skin, the quiet resilience beneath her exhaustion. Ethan, she murmured, I do not know how to repay a kindness that I have never been taught to expect. He shook his head gently. You do not owe me anything. Outside, the wind eased into a calm hush. Inside, Lyra's eyes held a fragile brightness, as if something within her had begun to thaw. And for the first time since she had stepped into his outpost, Ethan sensed the smallest shift in her posture, a subtle letting go, the beginning of trust where fear had been. Ethan dimmed the overhead lights, letting the room fall into a softer glow that matched the quiet of the fading storm. The heater's steady hum filled the silence, a kind of low heartbeat that made the outpost feel warmer than usual. Lyra sat still, her hands resting gently in her lap, now that the thermal bands had done their work. The tension in her shoulders had loosened, but a distant look lingered in her eyes, as if part of her was still standing out there in the cold. Ethan pulled a chair closer, not too near, just enough to show he was present without pressing in on her space. "You should try to rest," he said. "It is going to be a long walk out of the valley at sunrise." Lyra shook her head softly. "I cannot sleep. Not tonight." Her gaze shifted toward the small window beside the console, where the last trails of sand drifted past, thin enough now to reveal faint outlines of the dark horizon. "Where I am from," she continued, "night is the time we stay awake. We listen. We wait. Rest is for when things are certain." Ethan followed her look to the window. "Things are not certain very often," he said. "Not out here." Lyra's lips curved in a faint, almost wistful way. "Then you understand." He nodded. After a pause, he offered her a folded cloth, one of the soft towels he kept for cleaning instrument lenses. "You can use this for your face. The storm leaves dust even inside." Lyra accepted it with both hands, her touch careful, almost reverent, as though she was not used to being handed something so ordinary with that much gentleness. She dabbed at her cheekbones, watching the blue tint of her skin shift under the lamp. "Your outpost," she said quietly, "is small, but it feels peaceful, like it remembers kindness." The comment surprised him. "It is just metal and bolts," he replied. "It remembers whatever I put into it." Lyra lowered the towel, her expression thoughtful. "Then you put good things into the world." Ethan leaned back slightly, unsure how to answer that. Compliments were not something his life out here prepared him for. Before he could speak, the console emitted a soft chime, not an alarm, but a weather update. The storm had fully passed, leaving calm readings and a projected clear stretch of morning. Lyra watched the readout with a kind of quiet longing. "A clear morning," she whispered. "I did not think I would see one again." Ethan studied her profile, noting the way her breath eased just slightly. "You will have safe travel," he said. "I will make sure you start in the right direction." Lyra turned to him, her eyes holding that luminous violet glow he had grown increasingly aware of. "You keep saying safe as if it is something you can guarantee." "What?" Ethan rubbed his palm along the armrest of the chair, feeling the smooth metal warm beneath his touch. "Maybe because someone should," he said simply. "And tonight, that someone happens to be me." Her breath caught, not in fear, but in a soft, stunned way, as if the idea was unfamiliar but not unwelcome. She looked down, fingers tracing the seam of the blanket. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "where I come from, being protected is a privilege given only to those who matter." She lifted her gaze again. "And I do not matter to anyone." The statement settled in the air between them, fragile and painfully honest. Ethan felt the weight of it, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He leaned forward, slightly, meeting her eyes with a steady calm. "You matter enough," he said. "At least tonight, and at least here." Lyra held his gaze, the silence stretching warm and full. In that stillness, something inside her softened fully for the first time since she arrived. The outpost, quiet and dim, seemed to fold gently around the moment, as if acknowledging a shift neither of them could name yet. And for the first time since the storm began, Lyra allowed herself to breathe without fear. The first hints of morning crept into the sky, a pale silver edge slipping over the horizon and casting a muted glow across the outpost walls. The storm had settled into a thin veil of dust that drifted lazily across the ground, quiet and unhurried, as if the world itself was taking a breath after a long night. Inside, the lights remained low, warm enough to soften every metallic surface. Ethan stood near the window, arms loosely crossed, watching the faint shift in color outside. Behind him, Lyra stirred. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders as she rose, stretching with a careful, almost wary grace. Her skin caught the early light, reflecting it like frost on glass. "Is it morning already?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Close enough. The worst of the weather is gone." Lyra moved toward the window, stopping beside him. For a moment they stood in silence, side by side, as the sky brightened inch by inch. The quiet between them felt fuller than words. "It is beautiful," she murmured. "I thought I would not see another sunrise like this." Ethan glanced at her. "Why not?" Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, as if she was choosing which truth she could afford to share. "Because everything before tonight felt like it was closing in. I did not think I would reach any place safe." Ethan shifted his weight, absorbing the quiet confession. "You made it here," he said. "And you are still here." Lyra's gaze lingered on the soft horizon before she turned to face him. "You do not understand. Where I come from, when someone runs, it is not just misfortune. It is disobedience. And disobedience is not forgiven." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "Are they looking for you?" She hesitated just long enough for the silence to answer for her. Then she whispered, "Yes." He did not press. The fear behind her words was enough. She stepped back toward the table, fingers brushing the steam still rising faintly from her half-finished tea. "Ethan," she said, "why did you open the door last night? You did not know me. You did not know if I would bring danger here." Ethan let out a breath he had been holding without realizing it. "Because someone knocked during a storm," he answered simply. "And because doing nothing would have felt wrong." Lyra studied him with that deep, searching look he was beginning to recognize, the kind that seemed to read more than words aloud. "In my world," she said, "help is given only when ordered. Kindness without purpose is rare. It makes people suspicious." He offered a faint smile. "Then maybe you needed to see what is on this side of the desert." She looked down, a small, fragile expression flickering across her face. It was not quite a smile, not quite sorrow, something in between, something real. Ethan reached for his boots and pulled them on. The motion echoed softly in the room. "If you want," he said, "I can walk you to the ridge before the heat rises. It will give you a good start." Lyra watched him tie the last knot, her voice incredibly gentle when she replied, "You have already given me more than I expected, more than I have ever been given freely." She stepped closer, the early light brushing over her features. "Ethan," she whispered, "you should not get involved. The moment you step beyond this outpost with me, you will no longer be a bystander." He met her eyes, steady and calm. "Maybe I am tired of being a bystander." Lyra inhaled slowly, the truth of his words settling around her like the first warmth of morning. Outside, the desert brightened, quiet and vast. Inside the outpost, trust deepened quietly between them, as gentle and certain as dawn itself. Morning light continued to brighten the horizon as Ethan packed a small utility bag, filling it with water canisters and a locator beacon battered from years of use. He checked each latch twice, the motion steady and deliberate, while Lyra stood near the doorway watching him with an expression that carried both gratitude and a hesitation she could not hide. The desert outside shimmered faintly, still cool enough to travel, but the heat would rise quickly. He slung the strap across his shoulder and turned toward her. "If we leave now, we can reach the ridge before noon." Lyra did not move. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket she had folded neatly, as though reluctant to let it go. "Ethan," she said softly, "before we step outside, there is something I should tell you." He paused, waiting. Her violet eyes flickered toward the console, then to the window, scanning the quiet landscape as if expecting it to shift beneath her feet. "Those who search for me," she continued, "do not give up easily. They are persistent, and if they find me here, they may assume you helped." Ethan nodded, no fear in his expression. "I understand." Lyra shook her head slightly. "No, Ethan, you do not. Where I come from, guilt is assigned by association. Anyone who shows compassion to someone like me becomes marked. It is how they discourage help." Ethan stepped closer, closing the distance with a calm certainty that steadied her. "Then it is a good thing compassion is not something I have learned to suppress." For a moment, Lyra looked as if she might argue, but the words faded from her lips. She exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her chest as if grounding herself. The quiet stretched warm and delicate between them. Ethan opened the door, and a soft gust of morning air drifted in, carrying the scent of dust warming under the sun. Lyra stepped forward, her cloak catching the light as she crossed the threshold. But just as Ethan reached for the controls to seal the outpost behind them, a faint tone chimed across the console, barely audible but unmistakable. A signal. Lyra froze. Ethan returned to the panel in 2 quick steps, reading the incoming line. It was a proximity ping from a distant relay tower, the kind triggered only when a craft passed within scanning range. The note beneath it sent a cold ripple through the air. Unidentified vessel detected. Course unknown. Speed moderate. ETA to valley perimeter, 20 minutes. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. They are early. Ethan glanced at her. Are you sure it is them? She did not answer directly. She did not need to. The look in her eyes was enough. He pulled the utility bag tighter over his shoulder. If we move now, we can still reach the ridge before they search this sector. Lyra hesitated, caught between fear and an instinct to run. Ethan, I cannot let you be harmed because of me. If they find you at my side, they will not listen to explanations. Ethan shook his head firmly. I told you last night. You knocked during a storm. That was enough for me. Her breath trembled. The rising sun cast a pale glow across her face, illuminating a truth she had tried to hide. She had been alone for far too long, expecting danger from every direction, expecting abandonment as the natural order of things. Ethan extended his hand. Not a command, not pressure, just an offering. Come on, he said quietly. We can make it before they sweep the valley. Lyra looked at his hand for several seconds, her expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Then, with a slow and deliberate movement, she placed her hand in his. The moment was small, gentle, and yet it carried more promise than anything she had known in years. Together they stepped into the morning light, the desert stretching wide before them, the echo of trust guiding their first steps toward whatever waited beyond the ridge. Ethan and Lyra moved quickly across the cooling desert floor, their footsteps soft against the pale morning sand. The sun had just begun its slow climb, casting long shadows that stretched beside them like quiet companions. The air was crisp, carrying the faint metallic scent left behind by last night's storm. Ethan checked the handheld scanner strapped to his wrist. A thin line pulsed across the screen, mapping their path toward the ridge. We have time, he said, though his voice remained cautious. Lyra walked beside him, her cloak secured tightly around her shoulders, the fabric swaying with each step. Time is never guaranteed, she replied softly. But I trust your judgment. The words struck him more deeply than he expected. Trust was not something she gave freely, that much he had already learned. They continued in silence for several minutes, listening to the wind shift over the dunes. The ridge loomed ahead, a jagged rise of stone that marked the boundary between Ethan's isolated sector and the broader expanse beyond. If they reached it, they could slip into one of the narrow passes and avoid detection. Ethan paused halfway up a slope and offered his hand to Lyra. As she climbed, she accepted, her grip steady, her breath catching only slightly from the incline. Your world is quieter than I imagined, she murmured as they reached a small plateau. Ethan glanced toward the horizon. It has its quiet, but not everything stays that way. Lyra turned her gaze upward. A faint streak of light cut through the sky, almost imperceptible against the brightening dawn. But she saw it instantly. They are closer than I thought, she whispered. Ethan followed her eyes, scanning the sky. The streak faded behind a thin veil of clouds, but the message it carried lingered in the air like static. He felt her step closer, her voice barely audible. Ethan, there is something you deserve to know. He looked at her, catching the subtle tremor in her breath. All right, he said gently. Tell me. She hesitated, gathering the courage to speak. The people searching for me are not hunters or patrol officers. They are my own. My family. Ethan's eyebrows lifted, but he remained still, letting her continue. I was born into a line of leaders, she said quietly. But I did not want their power. I refused the position they chose for me. I left because I wanted a life built on my own decisions. That it was not acceptable to them. The wind picked up, brushing sand against their boots. Ethan absorbed her words slowly. So they want you back. Lyra shook her head. They want control. Bringing me back would restore their order. But I cannot return to a place where my choices mean nothing. Ethan's jaw tightened, understanding now the weight she carried. You are not wrong for wanting your own path. Lyra looked at him with a fragile hope. Even if that path puts you at risk? He met her eyes, steady and unshaken. A risk is something I choose, not something forced on me. Her breath faltered, touched by the quiet conviction in his voice. For a moment, the world felt suspended, the desert holding still as if listening. But the moment broke when the scanner on Ethan's wrist vibrated softly. A new signal appeared across the display, sharper than before. Lyra stepped closer. What does that mean? Ethan exhaled slowly. It means the vessel changed course. He turned the screen toward her. They are heading directly for the ridge. Lyra's fingers curled at her sides. They know where I would go. Ethan looked toward the narrow pass ahead. The sun's reflection glinted off the rocks, lighting a path they had no choice but to take. Then we move, he said. Before they reach it. Lyra nodded, resolve steadying her expression. As they began to climb once more, the shifting wind carried the faint hum of something distant, something drawing nearer. But neither looked back. They pressed forward into the narrowing passage, side by side. The truth finally laid bare, and the danger no longer a shadow, now a sunrise away. The narrow pass wound upward between tall stone walls, the air growing warmer as the sun lifted higher behind them. Ethan and Lyra moved with steady purpose, their footsteps echoing softly against the rock. The scanner on Ethan's wrist pulsed in quiet intervals, each vibration marking the vessel's slow approach toward the ridge. Yet for the first time since dawn, the tension between them did not feel sharp. It felt shared. At the crest of the pass, the land opened into a wide overlook. The desert stretched endlessly, a pale ocean of sand shimmering in the rising heat. Ethan slowed, catching his breath, scanning the horizon for movement. We have a few minutes, he said. Maybe more. Lyra stepped beside him, her cloak brushing lightly against his arm. Her eyes swept the landscape with an expression that mixed fear and acceptance, as if she was memorizing this moment just in case it was her last taste of freedom. Ethan, she said softly, if they reach us here, I will surrender. I will not let you be taken because of me. Ethan shook his head gently. I did not come this far to watch you walk back into a life you did not choose. Lyra looked at him, truly looked, as though she was trying to understand how someone could offer loyalty without obligation. A quiet wind rose, carrying the warm scent of sunlit stone. It brushed a strand of silver-blue hair across her cheek. She reached up to tuck it away, but her hand paused when she saw what Ethan saw. A small figure at the bottom of the ridge. Then another. And another. 3 in total, moving slowly but deliberately, stumbling a little on the uneven terrain. Ethan lifted the scanner, expecting a warning signal, but nothing registered. No vessel signature. No pursuit. Just 3 faint life signs. They are not who you fear, Ethan said. Too small, too erratic in movement. As the figures drew closer, the shapes took form. 2 children, 1 human and 1 alien, walking side by side, both weary, both coated in dust. Between them they supported a smaller alien child, her steps unsteady. Lyra's hand flew to her mouth, breath trembling. No, she whispered. They should not be here. They should be far from this place. Ethan hurried down the slope to meet them, kneeling as the smallest child collapsed gently into his arms. She was warm, breathing lightly, exhausted but responsive. The human child looked up at Ethan with wide, frightened eyes. We followed her, he said, pointing to Lyra. She helped us get away. She said she would come back. Lyra descended the slope slowly, her expression shifting from fear to a deep, breaking tenderness. She knelt beside the children, her voice barely steady. You should not have followed. It was not safe. The older alien child shook her head. You came for us first, she said. So we came for you. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle inside him. Lyra had not been running only for herself. She had been trying to protect those who had no one else. The truth illuminated everything he had seen in her, the caution, the fear, the refusal to speak freely. She had been carrying lives with her, even in their absence. Lyra touched the small girl's cheek, her fingers trembling. I left so they would not suffer for my choice, she murmured. I tried to build a path that did not trap them. Ethan looked toward the sky. Still no sign of pursuit. Still no signal spike. The vessel's course had shifted again in the scanner's last reading, drifting away from the ridge. Whether by coincidence or fate, they were safe for the moment. He turned back to Lyra, who held the children close, her expression soft with both relief and disbelief. You are not alone, Ethan said quietly. Lyra lifted her gaze to him, eyes shining in the warm morning light. I thought leaving meant choosing loneliness, she whispered. But I was wrong. Ethan extended a hand, steady and certain. Then let us choose the next step together. Lyra looked at the children, then at Ethan, and after a long breath filled with meaning, she placed her hand in his. The desert wind moved gently around them, carrying no threat now, only the silent promise of a new path forming beneath their feet, shaped by trust, choice, and the strange, unexpected grace of one night that changed everything.